Hey everybody, welcome to the show. I'm your host Mac, and today I have a special guest with me. I have Chris from KLine Guitars. How you doing, Chris?
Good. How you doing, Shawn?
Pretty good, buddy. And Chris, Guitars OK stands for Guitars Oklahoma, right? And
Right.
tell everybody where you're at because you're in close proximity to us. In fact, I pass through your area quite often.
Yeah, I'm just about 6 hours east of you there on Interstate 44. My shop is down in the South City area, which is I like to call it the Bevo area, really close to Bevo Mill. Really old part of St. Louis. I'm right on the original Route 66.
Route 66, man, Tulsa, Oklahoma, St.
Oh yeah.
Louis, right? Joplin, Missouri.
Yeah.
Oh, it just keep moving right through the whole old route, which has been redone a lot here in Tulsa. I don't know about St. Louis, but here
Oh
they're
yeah.
redoing a
Oh
lot
yeah.
of it. They still doing that up there
Yeah.
too?
Yeah, they're not taking great care of it, but it's still historically there. And interesting enough about that was when I was dealing in the early days of the company, we were trying to figure out how to name these guitars. And that was when there was a lot of pressure to not use things like S style, T style. They were even going after things like that. So I started choosing names of cities along the original Route 66. So Springfield was Springfield, Missouri, and honestly, Truxton is a city that doesn't even exist anymore. But
Really? I was wondering about that one.
um, yeah, I think it unincorporated years ago, but it was on the original map. So, and actually, Delmar really isn't. And then it was funny. I named it San Bernardino for the one style guitar. People asked me, "Have you ever been to San Bernardino?" And I was like, "No, I haven't." He said, "Well, you might not name a guitar after it after you've been there." And I was like, "Oh, come on." I live next to East St. Louis. It's all good.
That's funny. So tell everybody where they can get a hold of you. Like, where's the best place like to find your products? Is it through social media? Is there an online website? What's the best way?
And the website usually is the best way. It's the best place to start, at least. Just go to k-lineguitars.com. I'm also on Instagram with K_line guitars. I guess I'm on Facebook. I've got my Facebook groups. I have an actual K-line group, and then I also have a business page, and I do a lot through my personal Facebook as well.
Now, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you if they're interested in buying one of your guitars? Is it just your online website or messaging you on the social media?
Actually, the best way is to email me. Because when you get so many different formats going, you start to lose track of where you are. The company is very small, and I wear many hats. So I'm a little more old school with technology. So I'm like, shoot me an email. That is the best way to start. We've got our dialogue going, and I can also see what you're interested in, and we can keep track of it better under one format. Phone call
Now,
doesn't hurt either. I don't mind phone calls.
yeah, there you go. That's true
Yeah,
too, man. Old school, right?
yeah,
Give you a call.
yeah.
Is it like a business number? I take it then. Somebody you can
It's
call.
no, it's just it's my all-in-one number. I have it with me 7 days a week. I do a lot of talking on the weekends because sometimes it's better. Because
Yeah,
I'm not taking away time from the shop. So yeah, we're small.
yeah. What
We're
I'm hearing
small.
is you eat, live, and breathe this, and that's something that you're
Yeah,
not just a part timer. You're doing this all the time. It's your life.
it's
And
my yes, my career.
how long have you been doing it? Like, what year did you start the company?
I started the company officially with a name in 2004. I've been kind of doing it all through high school. When I was at Mizzou, I'd do it in the summertime, and but formally in 2004, I was working in the pharmaceutical industry prior out of college, and I found myself in a situation with a company where they pretty much sent us home for about 6 months, waiting to hear what the next step was going to be with the sales force. And that was really when I started up the idea. And I just started it up as buying bodies and necks, from trusted sources. I kind of looked around at what others in the market, and really there was only one other company besides Fender that was really heavily invested in this. So I kind of I looked at it more from imitation. Well, if it's working for them, how can it work for me? and it all just kind of hatched. I got a couple bodies, a couple necks. Didn't really have a lot of intentions. I always thought it would be really neat if somebody would buy something, but and I took it around town and everybody kept saying, how much are you going to price these at? Or when are you going to get them going? And I'm like working full time as a district sales manager and not, I was like, I don't know, but we'll see how we can make this happen. And we did. We did.
And you're
My dad had a
saying
body
how many
shop,
people were starting up then in the original startup? Was just
just
you and you
me.
two?
It
Okay,
was
and then
just me. Yeah,
wow.
just me. So my dad had a body shop next door to my house growing up. And that's where I would split my time on the weekends over there painting and getting things ready, and then moving over to my house on the weekends as well, getting assembly going. And I was using everything off the shelf at the time. But it just came together and it just started to snowball and became a really good problem.
That's interesting. Now, real quick, let's how many
Mhm.
employees do you have now at this point in time?
Just two.
Really?
That's it.
Interesting. So like
Mhm.
is somebody running like is the other person or something running like more of the social media merchandise helping out or is there also another person kind of equivalent with like building things with you?
What basically what it is, it used to be me and a ragtag bunch of musicians from St. Louis. They had night gig jobs. They were really good around a soldering iron. They understood setup, they understood all that stuff. So that was kind of the way we ran it. I started out with got into the CNC operations around 2010 and realized quickly that my pay grade, that was way above my pay grade. So what I did was a local guy approached me who was interested in buying my machine, who was also a guitar guy. So we made a deal that I basically indefinitely loaned him the machine, and we worked together to program everything. So now you can say we're two and a half, because that guy now just runs all the CNC programs for me. I supply him with all the woods, the actual work orders, and he runs everything off for me. And you know,
Yeah, that's really interesting. I used to be a drafter back in the day, mechanical
mhm,
drafting and all that stuff. So different shops had CNC machine programmers. I
mhm.
remember from the 90s and the 2000 era. So I understand it's more complicated than it looks. It's like learning a language or something.
Um,
Yeah,
too
it's
old for
not.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's nothing like where you're like doing like a bandsaw or something. CNC
right.
is its own like computer program. So that's cool. So now let's mention real quick some of the artists that I've seen on your website. You've
Hmm.
got like my favorite has been John Cordy, which we can give him a plug. He's
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
and I saw you also had Tim Smith and Guthrie Trapp and Steve
Hmm.
Miller and John Schofield, I guess, has been using your stuff. John Conley from Kenny Chesney. Devon Allman was interesting. I saw that on your list. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so these as these people started getting your product, how did that affect you? Were you kind of surprised, or were you just motivated by it? What happened?
I was shocked, to be quite honest, because it wasn't never that they never approached me necessarily and said, "Hey, I'm interested in that. Let's see." With Devin Allman, with that exception, he's a St. Louis guy. So,
Oh, okay, right.
yeah. So really, all of those people came to me after the fact, after they had purchased a guitar out on the market, and then they came back to me and said, "Hey, I got one of your guitars," and it was like when John Schofield called, I was like, What? Who's this?"
Yeah.
So it was very humbling. It really was. I mean, I was just like, oh my, now this is starting to get really real. Because prior to that, and honestly, you hadn't mentioned him, but my probably my second largest artist that really did the most generating of interest in direct orders was Todd Parkmore from Big Head Todd and the Monsters. They were just one of my bands that I top five bands still to this day. He's a player. I met him at Killer Vintage in St. Louis. He was playing one of my guitars and I happened to pop in there. The show was that night, and he was just in love with this Telly, a Truxton that I had built, and he was just saying how great it was and everything. And I told him, well, just take it and play it tonight, or take it and see what you think. So I go to the show that night and he steps out on stage and grabs it and plays like the first half of the show with it.
Wow.
And yeah, that you never get tired of that. One thing that has always kept me in this business, it's because it's not the money. There's not a lot of money in this industry. There just isn't. It is that whenever somebody gets a guitar and they call you or they email you and they say, man, this thing is transformative to me. It's inspired me to do a lot of different things in a lot of different ways. So you have to hold on to that, because once that dies, then you're done. Move on, go do something else.
So the passion is what I'm hearing. The fact that you're
Yeah,
doing it because you're out there creating something that other people are using to create something too. So if that
correct.
died off, then there's no point in you creating something, right? So I get it.
It's like if you step on stage and you lose the butterflies, then it's kind of like, what fun is it anymore? You
That's a
know?
good point. So
Yeah.
let's back up a little bit because I'll put some images on the screen as you were talking about Truxtons and Springfields, and like
Hmm.
you and I know already what that means, the S styles and the T styles and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But some listeners are not musicians on the show, getting and
Hmm.
they're now becoming interested in guitar because of the show. So it's funny.
Sure.
But yeah, let's back up a little bit about where you grew up. You said, are you from homegrown from St. Louis?
Yeah, I actually grew up in a little suburb called Rock Hill. It's got about 5,000 people. I like to say that because then they think I'm from some small town, but we're right smack in the middle of the St. Louis suburbs. I was born and raised there. I didn't move very far away from there, to be quite honest. I've stayed within a few miles of my mom still lives there. But it was quite kind of unique in the sense that my grandfather started a auto body business on the old family property back when it was a big dairy farm. So my dad and my uncle went into that business. It was right next door to my house in a residential area. So I kind of grew up around a suburban farm, so to speak. Um, all it 7, 8 years old, I had my hands involved tearing apart lawnmower engines and whatever it took. We had all kinds of crazy pets. We had goats and ducks and monkeys, and I mean, it was my uncle had horses. And again, this is right smack in the middle of suburban St. Louis. So it was a very incredible way to live to grow up, because it was a lot about growing up in the country and growing up in the city.
I understand that. I grew up outside east of Niagara Falls, New York, and it was a dairy farm community with hay farm.
Mhm.
And then we were, and I got bussed into the suburb, area for my Catholic grade school and all that stuff. So
Mhm.
I remember like cow tipping and all that stuff in the
Yeah,
70s and 80s and chip throwing and stuff, all that kind of
yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
But so let's tell everybody you grew up what in this like kind of like me in the 70s, 80s, classic
yeah.
rock, MTV, all that kind of stuff, right? We're that generation, I think, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah,
So what was
yeah.
your like favorite music growing up and like some of your influences like in bands and all that stuff when you were younger?
Well, I think the biggest influences, I was pretty much a Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd guy. That was what I was. Even in the 80s, with the exception of REM, that was about the only thing from the 80s that I really ever glommed onto and was a mainstay. And I still took it with me out of that time frame. But yeah, it was really listening to more of the classic rock, Rush, um, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, all the offshoots. Grateful Dead. I did. It was so happened to be that when I was in high school, that was the trend, was that the hippie stuff was coming back. And despite never living that lifestyle, I enjoyed the music. I really did. A lot of my friends were that lifestyle. So I just found probably Jerry Garcia as being, because it wasn't about how he played, and it wasn't up and down the neck and super fast. It was just how he chose what notes to hit and what notes not to hit, his phrasing, more melodic than anything. That just always, because I'm going to tell you, I was never, still am not a great guitar player at all. And people assume you are because you build guitars, but no, not necessarily. If you can't play them great, it's sort of like people who can't play a sport, but you know the game inside and out, so you become a coach. That's kind of what I did.
That's interesting. So did you play guitar in high school?
I did. I started when I was about 10 years old. My uncle, he was into country music and he only lived 2 houses over from me. So him and my dad on Friday afternoons in the summertime, they'd clear out the shop, they'd hose it all out, set up tables and chairs, set up a little faux stage of sorts. And two of my uncles actually, they would play country music, and they'd have all their friends over. And I just kept watching them on stage going, man, that looks really fun. So he lent me his old J45 with the neck was it needed a neck set so bad. And it was so hard to play at 10 years old, but he got me started with a few chords and then it was just buying books and just learning on my own because there was no internet. So the Heavy Metal Bible, I think is what the book was called.
I remember
And
that.
yeah, and it would go as deep as you wanted it to go. And of course, I only went a few chapters in, and then the theory came around, and I was like, I think I'm gonna pass on that.
I'm
Jimmy
learning
Page
all
didn't
that
know
now in my
theory, so
50s. I'm going back now and learning all
yeah,
that stuff
yeah.
now, like thirds and flat sevenths and modes. And
Hmm.
now I'm finding it. But yeah, you're right. So back then, more, you sound like you liked a lot of the melodic kind of soloing kind of thing, like
Hmm.
Garcia and all them guys where they're just were picking and choosing the nice Pink Floyd with his ambient textures and all that type of stuff. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Sounds like you're kind of in that groove and your environment down in St. Louis. So we have international viewers. We're out in the Midwest. You and I right now. I'm Tulsa. You're
Hmm.
St. Louis. So that Midwest country influence, right? I mean,
Cow pop is kind of what I call it.
that's funny.
Yeah, it can be classified as alternative, but with a little bit of country roots in it. Waylon Jennings, that outlaw country was what my mom listened to, besides John Denver, more than anything. But um, I was I was really like I had a lot of exposure to a lot of different types of music, and there was some of it where I'm like, that's not for me. We'll move that one on. But still, later on in life, like say for instance, classical jazz type stuff wasn't my thing, but then I got into the band Fish,
Oh
and
yeah.
then you start to listen to the way he plays, and he utilizes that within a rock setting, basically. And then it was just like, wow. So some of those wrong notes are cool, they are cool.
There is no wrong notes in jazz. It's just where you land.
That's right.
Really, it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
all right. So now you're going along. You're in high school. You got bands. You got musical influences in your family,
Mhm.
and eventually you went to college. You said something, right? Maybe or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
You maybe
Went to
St.
the
Louis.
university. Yeah, I went to University of Missouri, Columbia, Mizzou. Kind of not, it wasn't anything intentional. Um, I was dating my high school sweetheart. We were in town. She decided to get transferred to Mizzou to go into the therapy program up there. And I was like thinking that probably my dad's business is what I was probably going to do. And instead I decided, well, let's follow her up there. Let's see. A bunch of my friends were at Mizzou, so I went up there and I went through a year and I was like, wow, I had a great time and I got all C's. I can do this. So I stuck around, got an econ degree out of the place. It was just merely a matter of let me get a piece of paper to allow myself to be able to have some doors open that probably would never be opened.
So you end up getting the degree, and then you told us earlier that you ended up kind of being laid off, maybe, or kind of just when you start getting into the guitar thing, right?
Yeah, yeah. I started in the pharma world in '96, and I was in it just dabbling with guitars just for fun. And then around 2003, '04, I got into a situation where our company was not we didn't have our drug to market yet, so we had to kind of stay home and wait to hear what's next. And so then that's when it just started really catching fire. And that's when I started to really get deeper into it, learn more about how to do different types of finishes. I mean, the new stuff was not difficult for me because coming from the auto body background, which I worked all the way through high school and college, that stuff was all pretty easy for me. But it was what makes a good guitar. And that was what was very interesting because um, all I knew was is that everybody liked the guitar I built for myself. So in my mind, it was like, let's continue to make those guitars because obviously others like it. So I really didn't change much from the beginnings,
Do you still
little.
have that one?
I do. I do.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it actually is it's a really interesting story. Real quick,
Hmm.
that went out on tour with Chesney's band. Sugarland had it for a while. Thad Beatty had it, and they were at the Indianapolis, or I guess it was the Indiana State Fair years ago, and that was when the tornado hit. Right after they got finished setting up on stage, a tornado hit and collapsed the stage. So the guitar was out in 98-degree weather for 4 days underneath a collapsed stage, and he was mortified. And he sent it back to me and said, I'll pay for whatever, whatever kind of damages it needs to be done. Fixed on it. Nothing. I sat in the corner for a couple weeks, let it reacclimate, fixed a couple pots,
No
and
way.
it's been with me. Yeah. And it's
That's
just the one I'll never
crazy.
sell. Yeah. And it's the whole finish is about ready to fall off because it's so heavily weather checked, but it's still the best playing and sounding guitar that I have. And that's all up here though. That's not necessarily true, but
Right.
you get your favorites.
Well, it's preferences. Everybody, like do you like ZZ Top? Do you play with nines and tens? Do you play with 12s? Like Stevie Ray
Right.
Vaughan, 13s. It's
Sure.
all it's all preferences, right? I'm sure you're used to
Mhm.
that. Now I'm preaching to the choir, talking to you about that because I'm sure
Mhm.
dealing with guitarists all the time, right? I mean, there's
Yep.
all the argumentations out there now on YouTube and everywhere about tone wood. Is it a thing? Is it not? And PRS gets involved with all that, all them guys, But anywho,
Mhm.
let's get back to you. So, you had that guitar and you started making stuff. People liked it. Eventually you had a CNC machine come in. Now I do have a question. A lot of people wonder about the style. If your Springfield, which is an S style, which is
Mhm.
more. I'm a Strat guy.
Mhm.
So for me, like, were there any type of legal things you had to do in order to protect yourself? You know what I mean? From some of these bigger companies or anything? How'd that work?
Well, it was learning by fire. When I first started out, I did as everyone did. I used the Fender headstock. That's what people did. And,
Right.
it was licensed parts. So there was always that assumption, well, if they're selling it, you can use it. Not to be true. So I remember I was out weed eating and FedEx showed up with a signature package, and it was from a law firm, excuse me, in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And I opened it up and I about collapsed.
Uh-oh.
I thought that was the end of me. I'm done. And it was a very pleasant experience. I'm going to say that. I worked with their lawyers. They told me exactly what I was doing wrong,
Huh.
what I could not do. And it was interesting. Not to get into big details on it, but it was, they just basically didn't want me to market the trademarks. So, but at that point, the CNC operation was getting ramped up. The bodies were already rolling. So it was like, now it's time for a headstock change. And because now I need to make this my guitar and not just a different Nash or something like that. So,
It's
uh,
important that I've always said this before, and I've said it in other episodes.
mhm,
Aesthetically speaking, you walk into a shop as a guitar guy, and before I even choose a guitar to play, it has to look aesthetically pleasing to my eye.
absolutely.
If I don't like the headstock, I'm not touching it. I know it sounds bad, but it's just, you know what I mean? And so, how long
Human
did it take
nature.
you to redo your headstock? How long did that take to come up with that?
Well, I came up with it in about 5 minutes.
Whoa.
To be quite honest, it was just a matter of looking at what's out there and looking at all of like the Sir and Anderson and all these brands that had kind of came out roughly around the same time, a little earlier, and looking to see what they did and what would, and also looking at the patent or not the patent, the trademark. And if you really read these trademarks, there's a lot of pretty interesting stuff in there. like some assume that, you're the whole headstock, it's all the legalese of it all. But, and unfortunately, I went through them all and I came up with one, and that's the one that it currently is. And then there was one other guitar builder that I hadn't really looked at, and which was Don Grosh. And I'm similar, to his headstock on the S types, but we're all out there trying to avoid the one company. So that's literally
Big
how it all
brother's
came
watching.
about. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's just like on my set neck stuff, on the slabs and the carved tops and stuff. I wanted to make sure that I did something that was non-symmetrical, because that's where you could get in trouble with one of the other popular companies. So my headstock is actually, and I'll probably get in trouble now with Guinness, but me and a friend were sitting out at a bar and we were looking at a Guinness mirror in front of us, and he saw the top of the Guinness harp, and he scratched it out on a piece of paper and he said, check this out. What about this? This has got a story behind it. And his name is Brian Mathis, and he's the guy that I have to credit the most for this company being successful, because he's a good friend of mine. We were in band together for 12 years, an original band, and he's the guy who designed the logo. He came up with the whole Route 66 idea of the names, and so it really was just he was integral into the whole part. Yeah, so that's why I do owe him a lot of credit for how this company, exploded, basically.
So KLine, I've traveled a lot by car from Niagara Falls to Montana, where my dad's family's from New York down to Florida to Maine. I've been out to California. I've traveled a lot, and there are trains out there that say KLine on the
Yeah,
box
that's
cars. So
yeah,
was there
that's
any connection at all? My son was asking me that recently.
yeah, that's my
Sorry, I
distribution.
got balloons here.
That's okay.
So go ahead. How did you get the KLine then?
Well, the K line comes from my last name, which is Kroenlein, and that's a mouthful. If you see it spelt before you hear it said, you'll never get it right. And actually, when I was like 10 years old, I had a little lawn business around town, around the neighborhood, and I called myself KLine Lawn Service. And even though I watched my dad really literally kill himself doing auto body work, I was like, I'm never going to own a business. There's no way. I know. Go punch a clock, be a penguin. Just march in, march out.
W
And
two baby. W
that's right. W-2. Let it be somebody else's.
1099. No way.
No, no. So that's kind of how the name came about, and the name was there before any idea of a guitar company was there.
Interesting. So you had
Mhm.
that you've carried on that name from other ventures.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
love it. So it had nothing to
yeah.
do with the train line then. So I just wanted to make
No,
sure because you know what I'm
no.
talking about. The box cars,
I
they're all
do the
over.
big red cars. Yeah.
They're sitting on in a field through on our way to Springfield actually from
Hmm.
Tulsa, and I saw a bunch of them just old boxcars say K line sitting out
Yeah,
there, and I
yeah,
was
yeah.
just like thinking, and that's where my son was like, "Wait a minute, doesn't that guy on YouTube play K lines?" I'm like, "Yeah, I don't think it has to do with the train." So I'm glad to hear it didn't. So, but
Yeah,
it could
yeah.
have been a connection, Midwest Route
Right.
66.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, you
no.
could have played it up, but that's good. I like your story better, the original
Yeah.
one. So, Chris, let's talk about the style of guitars as you started making more of them, right? We already talked about the S styles, the T styles, and let's talk about some other types of ventures now and different body types that you've been doing lately.
Hmm.
So, go ahead and talk about the different styles that you've been venturing into lately.
Yes, well, get to sticking with the bolt-on first. I designed one called the Delmar, which wasn't anything completely original, but I basically what I did was threw a S and a T style body on top of each other, as well as a Jazzmaster style. And I started spinning these things around to see what I could do that wasn't completely something unique, because we're guitar players. We buy Strats, Tellys, and Les Pauls for the most part. So you can't get too far away from, what people are accepting. So it kind of hatched out as being a smaller, slightly offset style guitar. And typically I put three Firebirds in it, with five-way switching and a push-pull to do the neck and the bridge together. And it's done fine. It's going to be after somebody has all the others and they want to add something for more of that ambient sound, because Firebirds are very good at that. They're very clear, they're very punchy, they're very open, and very sparkly. Um, and then it got into the doing the slabs, like the juniors and specials and things. And more of that is how can I design that neck joint to be something that anybody could put together, essentially. So I worked with the heel of the neck in more of a fender style or bolt-on style pocket, to where there was nothing in the pocket that had to be shimmed or anything to get the correct angle. It was putting the angle on the heel. And that then all you have to do is fit it, glue it, slide it in, clean it up, clamp it. Done. All done. And
Nice.
the perfect angle every time. And the same with the carve top. There is never any shimming that has to be done to it. I don't have to jig them. All I have to do is, because of everything has been done for me already, that all I have to do is fit them, slide them in, glue them up, and it's done.
That's pretty amazing. So, um, let's talk about the aging of guitars. Before we started the show here, you and I were talking about it. So, pandemic hits, right? People
Mm-hmm.
are home. I ended up being home and stuff. My wife works in hospitals as anesthesia, so she's at hospitals. She was still
Mm-hmm.
working because they couldn't shut down.
Right.
But a lot of people pick up guitars, right? I'd been on a
Mm-hmm.
hiatus for about 8 years at that point, maybe almost,
Mm-hmm.
of playing guitar, just doing stuff. And I pulled mine out, right? Like a bazillion other
Right.
people did, right? I mean, we're
Mm-hmm.
sitting there learning YouTube, and now all of a sudden I start going on something called Reverb, and I start looking at it besides eBay, and I start finding these aged guitars. And I showed you my custom Strat, a '59 I got from Drew Wynn. Give him a shout out,
Mm-hmm.
Guitar House of Tulsa. But let's talk for a minute about the appeal of what aging. Well, first I'll talk about what aging is and the appeal of it.
Well, aging is just kind of taking the guitar from like the early days when they used to spray all the finishes super thin. And so, like, say, even fingerboard wear on some of the early Fenders, that on most modern guitars, that would probably never happen in two lifetimes, because it's more of a acrylic urethane versus nitro and whatnot. So my idea was to just build them as they would have been built back in the day, and then put them through the artificial aging process, which is lots of tricks and things to try to get things. Sometimes you don't want to spray the finishes too flat, because then they don't look sunken in, they don't look old, they don't look aged. So you kind of use some toners on the colors to kind of shift colors. And there's a lot of the chains and screwdrivers and things like that in the process too. That's all the same. But my focus was more on having a vintage shop here in St. Louis that's got tons of vintage instruments coming through, and really looking and studying them and knowing what wear patterns they really had. And never did you see one that looked like Rory Gallagher. I mean, I've never, besides a Rory Gallagher, you
Besides,
know.
yeah.
Yeah. So it was not my focus is on making them feel right, with the neck finishes, um, making them it's like nobody wants to buy the old blue jeans that you could literally stand in the corner. They were so stiff. So
Right.
kind of with my aging, there is the one that'll stand in the corner, which is the new. Then the Closet Classic is like the pre-wash. And then the Relic is more of the trendier, putting the rips and tears in the right spot to kind of make a statement. And that's really and like we were talking about before we started this, the first ding on the guitar is horrible. It really is. It's just like on a new car when you get your first door ding. Yeah, it just kills you. So
Hmm.
I was like, I feel unencumbered when I play a relic versus a brand new guitar. And I noticed that at the NAM shows. I went to NAM about 8 or 9 times. And you'd hand somebody a new build versus a relic build and watch their approach to the guitar. And it was just different.
That's an
I
interesting
do
point.
believe that it opens people's minds to forget about the tool and to just use it as a tool and play it.
Because at the end of the day, like the guys on that pedal show, Mick and all them guys on that, if
Mhm.
you ever watch that, Mick and them
Mhm.
guys, they're always, it's like they sell a guitar after they loved it for a while, but it is a tool. They're trying to
Right.
make these, the sound. And so
Mhm.
if the guitar can make you feel better and make your sound better, right?
Absolutely. Mhm.
So yeah, so what are your sales like when it comes to aging compared to a new look right now? Which one's winning?
I would say probably 80 to 85% is relic stuff.
The relic,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, it's just relic stuff. That's plain and simple. New builds are very few. And closet classics are the next biggest, where you just put a little patina on the whole instrument, age the hardware a little bit. And when I age, I don't rust. There's so many that gets rusty saddles and screws, and it's like that might be realistic, but like for instance on my Truxtons, I don't even age the saddles because they're
Wow.
brass. Within a matter of 6 months from your sweat, they're going to turn green on you, and all of that hardware in there is going to end up getting all jammed up anyway. So I don't even age those. Yeah, things like that. And Strat bridges, I just do a nice little light patina on them. Nothing's rusted. I actually use 3-in-1 oil afterwards to make sure everything's working properly like it should. Plastics just kind of discoloring them and kind of the way that they did over time.
Is there a lot of trial and error that goes through this? Because man, there are websites and Instagram sites where guys are, and Facebook groups I'm a part of, where guys are just ruining stuff, and they know they are. They didn't mean to. They're just
Right.
trying and trying and trying. So did you go through a lot of
Yeah.
trial and error?
I did at the beginning. You hear of everybody knows about the muriatic acid treatment, and that's really anymore, that's just for chrome stuff. So I kind of transformed everything to nickel because nickel, even on its own, is going to tarnish within a year. But there are things out there that will allow it to instantly patina and it doesn't do any harm to the parts, which is a big difference.
That is a big difference because yeah, so many
Mhm.
guys are dragging their stuff now and chains across it and dragging them across the bodies and everything, and then pretty soon they actually
Mhm.
realize they messed up something like the neck. Now it's like
Oh yeah, yeah,
it's like you still want it to work good, and you still want it to sound
right,
good.
yeah,
That's like my
yeah.
custom shop is it looks old, it's got like a heavy relic kind of, but
Mhm.
not too much, but yet the fretboard is like perfectly new looking. Yeah, I mean,
Right,
of course. So I mean, I
yeah,
want to play it well. I don't want it to
sure.
but yeah. So anyway, so that's it. Another thing I did want to talk to you about was I think you make your own pickups too, because John
Yes.
Cordy was talking about using KLine pickups in his episode today. So talk
Mhm.
to everybody about how you get into making pickups. It's one thing to make the guitar bodies, and that's another thing to make
Right.
the electronic section.
Yeah, the summer of 2018, that was where I really sat down and started to really figure out this whole winding. I had been dabbling in it for 15 years, never had really the time. Well, that summer of 2018 was a particularly slow summer. So I had a lot of time to try out different wire, to try out different manufacturers' magnets. And then the reality of it hit me that everything was just meh. It just was, yeah, it's fine, but it's not, it really doesn't have that extra something. So then it was going and contacting foundries and having magnets analyzed. And the A5 or Alnico 5 magnets that were used back in the 50s is not the same composition that they make it today. Because it would be too
Right.
expensive for especially the American foundries to do that. So I found a foundry that analyzed it, and they already, oddly enough, had that particular formula on. So I have all my Alnico 5 and Alnico 2 done up from old magnets and poured specifically for me. Now, wire, Electrosolo is basically the biggest wire manufacturer out there. So the wire is the wire. It's what you do with the wire. And I was also looking at it from a perspective of a financial perspective, because I'll give a shout out to Lawler. Lawler, great pickups, great people. Jason, I consider a friend. Stephanie, they did a great job for me for all those years. And it was my probably one of my biggest vendors, bills, so to speak, per year. So it was also a financial thing. That if I could get some pickups that I was very proud of, that was one of the few ways that I could really give myself a raise in the company. And it was also just fun to sit there and what if I did this? What if I altered different magnets, A3, A5, A2, different line patterns, and just all kinds of just different things to try to create. And then it gets to be a big spiraling hole. Then you're sitting there, your beard's down to your chin, you haven't slept in days, and you've got a big pile of just wire next to you
Yeah.
because and it does. It gets addictive. And at a point, you have to just, it's like an artist. They have to sign the bottom and move on. And that's kind of what I did. And I still, though, people will say, hey, man, I'm looking for this kind of particular thing out of my Strat pickup. And I'm like, okay, I, I, I got some ideas. I can wind up something like that. So, and it's just fun. It's mundane, though, sitting there in front of that winder.
I
I
was
mean,
just gonna ask you about that. Is it, you got
oh,
the
yeah.
winding machine going and stuff?
I don't do any, I'm not big enough to have to worry about the CNC winders yet.
Right.
So
Okay.
I can still hand wind everything. And there is a little something to be said. Some don't hear it, but I do notice the difference between a CNC wound pickup and a hand wound pickup. There's just a
So,
different dynamic to it.
so I know a lot of people like myself that have never been involved with that aspect. You know, what I mean, a lot of my friends have parts casters, and you can
Mhm.
just buy the pickups from Lola or whatever. But
Sure.
how long does it take to make like a good set? What are you talking?
Well, I think probably people would want to hear me say it takes hours, but the process is once basically it's like cooking. Once you know what ingredients you need to have to make that dish the best it can be, that's where the work went into it. Now, as far as spinning, say, a strap pickup, it takes you about 5 minutes to put together the flat work, dip it, get it dried up and lacquer. Actual winding of the pickup is about less than 6 minutes. I mean, it doesn't take that long. Then you just solder on some leads and you pot it, you know. But the number of hours and failed attempts and it trying to perfect that sound. And I'm admitted, I'm still working on some of my current models to say, what if I did this to them? And the gaussing of the magnets is huge. You can literally change a pickup just by the way you gauss the magnets. So I did a lot of research in old strats and tellies and stuff, and did gauss measurements on the old magnets. And honestly, the ones that sounded the best were ones that kept their charge, despite what people think. Um,
Interesting. That's
yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
and then using a little bit more non-traditional, like I like using Alnico 2 magnets in my signature set
Mhm.
because it's a weaker magnet. It's got a nice butteriness to it until you hit that note hard, and then it kind of explodes. And the height, because it is a weak magnet, you can get it real close to the strings, or you can back it off. It's just so many different things you can do with it. But people are creatures of habit. They see Alnico 2 and they're like, I'm like, judge it by, what's inside, not the cover, because they're really very cool pickups and they're very dynamic and they're very useful. Really better as a flat pull set. So that's one thing about them.
I find this interesting because there's another guitar maker on my show. I hang out with him a lot. Seth Jones here in town.
Hmm.
He's a monster player. If you get a chance to check out some shorts of him on my
Hmm.
channel, oh my goodness, he's got the benders and everything. He's
Hmm.
opening up for Sonny Landreth even pretty soon here. If you know Sonny, the
Hmm.
slide player.
Hmm.
So Seth is all slide. But I find the parallel between us players looking for tone and
Hmm.
pedals. For example, I'm an ambient player, so I'm always buying and trying new ambient
Hmm.
pedals. But I find the parallel to guitar makers getting hooked into like making pickups and finding the right magnetisms in the strings and overwound or
Hmm.
not overwound. So I find it seems like you guys end up getting into that same kind of thing where you just start getting sucked into it, a rabbit trail. You just keep trying
Oh,
them, and it seems like it'll never
inductive.
end, right?
It never ends.
It
It,
never
it, it
ends.
doesn't. And the day that it ends, again, like I said earlier, that's the day you walk away
Right.
because you lose the passion for it. And that's kind of what then transpired into the amplifiers was that fact of, you know, no matter what you believe, I go in every day and it becomes a job. It becomes, you've
Of
got a
course.
assembly line of things going.
Of course. Yeah.
Um, so it was one of these things where I just really, well, basically what it was, this is to be quite honest to how it happened.
Hmm.
My dad's cousin's kid, so like my second cousin, he built amps and he came to me and wanted me to build him like a junior style guitar. And I said, I'll do it if you build me a 6G3 clone. And he did. We swapped our items with each other, and I was blown away because I have a 62 Deluxe.
Wow.
And this amp was more open sounding by far than my original Deluxe. So then I started, as I did with the guitars years ago, I went around and let a bunch of monster players and people listen to the amp, and they're like, wow, that is just an incredible amp. So then we got to talking, and I said, hey, man, do you want me to help you get a guitar amp business going? And he's like, yeah. I said, that would be awesome. And I said, well, what do you want to call it? Because his name is Dustin Sterling. And I said, Sterling is a pretty cool name. He's like, no, I want to call it KLine. I want to partner with you. So I don't build the amps. That's not what I do. I have built some of them, but for the most part, he does, that because that's what he does. And he's meticulous. And it almost looks like a robot put them together because all the everything, the wires are perfectly straight, perfectly bent. He's got everything routed where it needs to be to cut back on, noises and things like that. So that's the way I see myself moving forward is to start partnering with other people and trying to spread the brand name because that's still the biggest challenge. Outside of places like the Gear Page and TDPRI, I don't have a big presence in the United States as far as shops, but worldwide, I'm in some good markets. But what I need to do moving forward is to be able to concentrate on more of building that dealership where people can actually get their hands on this stuff and not just hear about it. And that's been one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, it's good that you brought that up because I interviewed Walrus Audio, which is a pedal making company and
Mhm.
all that stuff,
Yeah.
and Colt was awesome. And when he was talking about this concept, it was hard for them, and they got into like Guitar Center now, and Sweetwater's been pushing their products.
Hmm.
So there's only so much space available, and I guess there's a term I can't remember it is an economic term for the amount of money they have to buy pedals like shops to buy a
Hmm.
bunch from you and then sell them. I mean, that
Right.
cash flow is, a little low. So I'm sure with
It's narrow
guitars
band.
is similar, right? Amazing.
Yes, because the guitars are a lot more to buy them.
Right.
Profit margins typically are better on guitars and amps than they are on pedals.
Right. Yeah, you're talking 250, $500. They have some,
Yeah.
they have one with little tubes in it now. It's really cool. It's
Oh yeah.
like, but
Yeah.
yeah, so if you're expanding your market,
Mhm.
you've got amps right now. How long does it take to get an amp if somebody wanted one? Do you have any in stock? Does it take 6 months? What are you looking at?
It can take anywhere from 3 to 6 months on an amp. We don't typically I don't build anything. Um, that is available direct and, immediately available. We always do everything by order. Dealer orders. I mean, they order the stuff and typically they're relics. So against what people would probably believe, relics are the quickest guitars to build
That's
because
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, you don't have to. I mean, if you get an eyelash or something like that, or a crazy hunk of dirt right in the middle, yeah, you just go on past it. You don't even think twice about it because it'll be, part of the whole thing. But when you're dealing with something that's brand new, you really have to make sure that you seal it up and it sets and dries real good. You have to be more meticulous. And there's a lot of times where you're just like, oh man, now I just got to wipe it off and start all over. So, um, yeah.
So let me ask you now, as you were in post-pandemic now, have you had any problems getting any of these supplies, any of these woods, anything like that at all?
No, I mean, swamp ash, southern ash is just that's not, I don't even know that that has really anything to do with the pandemic. That's more of just the lower Ohio River Valley, Mississippi River Valley, where a lot of that, southern swampy ash comes from. They've had a lot of problems getting it out, um, because there's been a lot of flooding in those areas. And the ash trees are just the ash borers hit them hard and they're just not as many. So it's a little difficult per board foot. You have to pay a whole lot more for ash now. And so what I've done, because everybody, of course, wants a 5 pound guitar. I mean, for some reason, ash is not that wood anymore. I mean, on occasion, I can, do a 6.5 pound Truxton or something, but usually they're right around 7 pounds, which is it's a fair weight. But what I've done is then now I've looked into alternate woods like the roasted eastern white pine, which makes the pine a little harder. Tonally, if I always say there's as much tone difference between 10 identical guitars as there are two guitars of different species. There really isn't in an electric guitar that body wood is such a small part of what's going on there. So the Eastern pine, it's a beautiful, beautiful wood. It's like a coffee colored, in a way, weak coffee colored ash. The grain is beautiful. There's no knots in it. There's none of that stuff. And it's just become, and yeah, if you want, I built a Delamar. Well, actually, I have a Springfield of my own that's 6 pounds 1 ounces, and
It's pretty
it
light.
sounds like a great Strat. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
light as can be. So that's kind of the way. But if you want a traditional blonde or butterscotch, you can't do that on this wood. The color will, you'll have some mustard, oh, just terrible color. So I've tried it, trust me.
Right.
But yeah, that's the parts are still the Japanese factories, which Goto is, one of my top parts companies. I just think everything Goto builds is just awesome. So the majority of all the
Goto.
hardware I use is
Yeah.
Goto. Yeah,
Yeah,
it,
that
it,
makes
it just
sense.
gets it done. That has been a problem, but that actually has been kind of a problem since that was it the big earthquake or the tsunami or whatever over in Japan that really knocked things crazy there for a while. So yeah, you do run into a few things, but as far as maple for necks and the mahogany for the set necks and everything, no, it's there. I don't use it, and I don't buy like the big companies. I actually buy body blanks from somebody. I know what they weigh, I know what they look like. And I know what if I build this into a Springfield or a Truxton, I know exactly what the body's going to weigh within an ounce or two. So I don't have the facility, this big huge facility to have all this wood sitting around like a lot of the companies do.
Right.
So that's why I do what I do. When people want me to get into these exotic woods and things, I'm just like, never been there. I've never done it. I don't know what to expect.
So you
So
stay in your lane then. You just kind
I
of you tell
stay in
them, yeah.
my lane. Do what you do what you can do best. And that's what I've always done. If something, I've tried things in the past when I used to have custom guitars in my name. and it was a disaster. I was like, I can't make a living doing this. You
It's too
know,
much. Yeah.
people, they don't want to pay anything for anything, but they want it to be fully customized. And it's like, this would cost you 6, 7 grand from other companies. And they say, oh yeah, I know. I've been in contact with them. Well, and you want me to do it for 2,500? Yeah, it's so you got to deal with stuff like that.
Oh, I'm sure you probably got stories for days when it comes to customers and their
Oh,
inquiries and their demands and
yeah.
it's,
Well, I
you
love
know.
it when they bring me the list of all of the best parts, the most expensive parts, and say they want this guitar. And I look at it and I say, from one of the very well-respected bridge companies, on a S-style guitar, I'm like, if I use that on my guitar, it's going to be so bright, and because my guitars are very resonant, those those are great for when you want to freshen up an old, guitar that's kind of dead. Throw one of them on there, you're good to go. But no, I've selected all my hardware based on sound and performance, and it isn't necessarily the most expensive.
That's
But the
amazing.
Goto tuners are the best out there, and I've been using them ever since the beginning. And they are more expensive, but you know what? They are well worth every penny.
You know, it's interesting because I've heard other builders talk about them. So there's got to be
Mhm.
something to it. I mean,
Oh, we're all
why
fighting
reinvent the
for them.
wheel when it's already working?
We all get ours from all parts, and we're all fighting over them.
I love it, man.
Yeah.
So as we're wrapping up here, buddy, what are we looking at for the future? You talked about expansion a little bit. So you've got amps involved. So we got guitars, you got a few
Mhm.
models, you've got some amps, you have some merchandise, t-shirts and different things.
Sure.
Is there anything on the horizon you want to tell everybody about? Anything?
Well, I think as on product wise, I think right now we've still got a lot of brand building to do with pickups and amps, even guitars for that matter. So I think in the future, what I'm really focusing on is getting the brand awareness out beyond the message boards and the YouTube videos, and to where the people that don't pay attention to that stuff that can just walk into a store. So dealer network in the United States is definitely priority one moving forward. Um, Within the product line, I eventually do want to utilize the things that I've learned with the set neck stuff and really push that into designing more of a unique shape. But again, it's kind of like you got to go with something that's more recognizable at first so people can be willing to take that dive. It's just like you think, wow, I'll come out with this and everybody's just going to line up. Well, yeah, you get the people lined up, the first 20, but their orders in and your head's spinning. And then it's like, okay, guys, now what? So they have to get out there and talk about it. And so that in I've never marketed myself as far as advertisements. I did a few ads years ago, when it would be close to NAM or something, I would put a few ads in some magazines, things like that. But that is something that I've recently taken on an outside source to try to start preparing me for the cost of these campaigns because they are very costly.
Hmm.
And being a single father, with a set of twins that are in college, my risk days are limited right now. So there's another part too that I really need somebody to come in and say, all right, man, here's what we're going to do. And then I'll just jump to the table because my whole style with management through the drug industry and everything that I've learned from my dad is you don't have to be the smartest guy in the room. You just got to hire the smartest guys in the room
Heck yeah.
and gals too, for that matter.
Yeah.
So that is really where I have to get to a point where I'm going to have to let go of my baby a little bit. And that's one of the hardest things in the world to do is
It's a
to,
life lesson right there, brother. When
it is.
type A, we used to call it years ago,
Mhm.
Enneagrams now, all that type
Mhm.
of stuff, personality testing. But what it comes down to is, you've done so much and you've
Mhm.
taken it so far, then to let somebody else handle these things and to
Mhm.
trust them, that's not easy for guys our age, is it?
No, in one thing that you do always dream of is that, hey, this, and I learned this through recently going through a divorce and talking about the business value, that my business is only valued at me. I am the value of the company. That's it. There's
Right.
no trademarks necessarily. I mean, I have some trademarks, but they're not anything that's got any real value to it. So, well over, been about a year and a half ago, I hired in a guy named Ben Haskenhoff. He was a Gallup. He went to Gallup. He graduated 10 years ago or something, and he went to work as a repair guy here in town. And I kept my eyes on him because oddly enough, his dad was a customer of my dad's at the shop. We grew up right up the street, right up the street. He was 20 years my younger, but I wanted him to come into the company to add value to the company. And he's added huge amounts of value to the company. He is a true luthier. He's like, why don't you just do this way? And I'm like, huh, what do you know? The kid taught me something. And that's another thing is just to build the company, it needs somebody who's going to be the future of it. Because shoulders, I played hockey for 20 some odd years. I don't even know how many years. And I've got bad shoulders and hips now and knees, and I can't necessarily do all that all day long like I used to be able to. So, and I want to build the value of the company, and that's going to be done by adding more employees. But we have to get to that point of getting the brand awareness out and getting the volume up. And that's what the most important thing is moving forward. Got to tell more people about KLine and let them feel it and touch it, smell it, lick it, chew it. Guitar players need to do that. They'll look at something three, four, five times, and then they start scratching their chin saying, let me give it a try. So,
You're not lying there, brother. It's like I didn't want to
yeah,
touch that guitar when Drew had it up on the wall.
right.
I just knew, because
Yeah,
I had a
there's that
MIM
danger.
Strat that when I got back into guitar and it was okay, it was just a
Mhm.
Mexican one, and
Yeah.
from a big box store, but and I might do a series coming up. I want to do a series on the relevancy of guitar stores in the modern era
Hmm.
because I still feel that you guitar players for the most part want to take it off the rack. They want
Yeah.
to feel the weight. They want to, I mean, we Sweetwater and all them are great. I love it, but there is the idea, like you said, if you can physically hold it and see that feel, and because the shapes of the necks,
Hmm.
everything makes a difference. And plug it in maybe a little bit, give it a
Yeah.
whirl, right? I mean, that happens.
Well,
That's how guys buy stuff.
it is. And if you're not like in an area that has like a Dave's guitar, or you've got
Right.
like um what was I trying to think? Oh, like Chicago Music Exchange.
Oh, I've been
Yeah.
there. That's great.
Where you go in there and you've got every brand at your disposal.
Yeah,
I mean, that's not realistic for most people out there.
that's true.
And I think that what made things like Sweetwater and everything explode more was the fact these guys are like, I have to drive 4 hours to get to play those guitars. So I'll just buy one and I can just return it if I don't like it. And
Yeah.
that's the reality of it. But I do think that people are craving now that we've gone to killing retail. I think that the boutique style service orientated type of guitar shops are going to be the ones that are going to continue to move on. As we've seen, with Sam Ash just, deciding to pull the plug on everything. I think we're going to see more of those big box stuff. I think made in America and supporting American companies and that whole mindset is starting to come back slowly. Um, and unfortunately, a lot of the old dealerships that are still well renowned, it's an aging population. I mean, they're getting old and they're still sharp and they're great at what they do, but it's like nobody is really wanting to say, "Hey, I want to take that shop over," because it's hard to when that owner, like say Dave Henson in St. Louis, he this is what he has up here. It's up in here, and you can buy his business, but you can't buy his knowledge, his connections. You can't buy that stuff. So it's going to be interesting here in the next 10 years where everything's going to go in the market.
Yeah, we have Drew Wynn, mentioned earlier, with Guitar House of Tulsa, amazing place, vintage equipment, all this stuff, right?
Mhm.
And then we also have Barnett Music Exchange here in town. We also have a newer one, Tulsa Band opened up a store in town. I can't think of the name, another guitar store in town. And we got
Mhm.
Fire Brothers, and we have all these like, and plus we have the big box store in town too. But all these other places now are kind of booming, and the
Mhm.
personal thing, they're not paying minimum wage, like the big box store is where it's just some employee handing you a guitar. These are
Mhm.
people you walk into the guitar store and they're players and they're invested in this emotionally and they love what they do and
Yeah.
that's been a big difference in my life. Like picking that Strat compared to the MIM that it wasn't even really a good one for me, but it's just on the wall
Sure.
at the big box. So I
Mhm.
agree with you. But the thing is you're right. A lot of places don't have like what we have in Tulsa and
Mhm.
Nashville has and maybe St. Louis has. There are
Mhm.
people like in San Francisco. One of my guests on another show, he uh he has to drive like almost 3 hours to get to a decent guitar store. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I drive 15 minutes. I get to go see Drew and them.
Yeah.
But that's just the
Yeah.
reality of it.
Frisco, I had for a minute was a dealership up there,
uh,
and I was the most expensive guitars in the shop, which you don't necessarily want to be.
right.
And he had
Yeah.
no idea how to sell boutique instruments at all. And that was a learning lesson for me too, as a business owner.
Yeah.
I was willing to say, you want a dealership? Okay, this is what we do. And then all of a sudden you're looking at them all and they're like, they don't know, half of them don't know how to sell anything like this.
That's
So you have
exactly what I was talking about.
yeah.
All right. Hey, Chris, thanks for being on the show, man. I really appreciate it. I hope everything goes well for you. And I look forward to maybe meeting you in person. And I love hearing all your sounds out there with your guitars, brother. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Much
Yeah,
appreciated.
so I'll put everything in the on the screen as we were talking earlier, and in the show notes for everybody to reach out to you. So when they want to buy guitars and buy amps and buy pickups and maybe have questions, they can get a hold of you. All right, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. More than welcome.
All right, thanks, Chris. I appreciate it, brother. Be safe out there, man.
All right, you too, Shawn. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. See you, buddy.
Bye-bye.